Director of Mancos Conservation District, and Dave Cancer, Deputy Chief Engineer of Colorado River Water Conservation District. Our speakers will be overviewing multiple benefit irrigation improvement projects and different types of funding sources that have been used to execute the projects they've been involved with. This is the 12th webinar hosted by the Ag Water Network, and these webinars are designed to help keep ag producers and other water stakeholders informed about water-related issues that affect them, including irrigation efficiency and funding, and watershed and stream management planning, as well as water rights and water quality. A little background on the Ag Water Network. We were created by Colorado Cattlemen's Association back in 2015 out of concern over the increasing loss of irrigated ag land in Colorado. So our mission is really quite simple. It's all about helping to keep ag water connected with ag land. And we try to accomplish this through a variety of means, including outreach, meetings, workshops, presentations, and webinars like today's, as well as collaboration with other like-minded organizations and technical resources and tools. And all of our resources can be accessed at our website, which is agwaternetwork.org. If you have technical questions or challenges today, please email those to aaron@coloradocattle.org, or you can call the CCA office at 303-431-6422, and we'll try to help you out. If you have questions for the speakers, once they get rolling, we're going to have a little chat box down in the lower right of your screen. So please use that chat to go ahead and enter your question, and we will try to get to as many of those as we possibly can. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting the recorded webinar on our website, agwaternetwork.org, along with the highlights of the webinar. And on the highlights, I'll be sending that out to everyone that registered next week. So it's now time, I think, for our first speaker, and that is Gretchen Rank. Gretchen is the Executive Director of the Mancos Conservation District in Mancos, Colorado. And Gretchen has served in that role since 2015. The Mancos Conservation District's mission is to promote long-term sustainable use and protection of the Mancos River watershed. And through a partnership with the Mancos Watershed Group, the Conservation District has helped secure over $10 million in funding to implement more than a dozen projects that address locally identified and prioritized issues. Today, Gretchen is going to be talking about irrigation diversion structure improvement projects that have been installed in the Mancos River watershed. So, Gretchen, are you ready to for me to hand it over to you? Let's see. I'm not hearing anything. Aaron, are you hearing anything?
There we go. I got my pop-down menu to unmute. That was my problem.
There we go.
All right, I'm going to fix my slides real quick. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate your time and spending your lunch hour with us. I'm going to start out this presentation with just a quick list of some assessments that the Mancos Conservation District and partnerships completed that really led up to our 2011 Mancos Watershed Plan. The Watershed Plan has been kind of an integral part of our success since 2011, and so I wanted to just dive into that real quickly. The first assessment I want to mention was an assessment that led to a 2002 303D listing on the East Mancos River. That'll come into play later in my presentation in being able to address water quality issues and also integral funding to address those issues. In 2003, we were designated a salinity control district or area. And so that again has really helped with some of the funding of some of the projects that we've been able to complete since 2011 and has made some of those funding avenues possible. We did a lot of assessments with the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, NRCS, the Department of Reclamation, Mining and Safety, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and also formed the Mancos Valley Watershed Group in 2006, which really formalized the meetings of all of these partners and really made it possible to move a lot of these projects forward. The projects I'll be talking about today came out of the 2010 Mancos Conservation District Diversion Survey and Inventory. And that is one of the surveys that was in the watershed plan, but that recommendations were able to come out of that watershed plan for improvements. So some of those recommendations really revealed critical issues. Within the Mancos watershed, irrigators were currently using push-up diversions that required at least annual rebuilding, but did a poor job in our variable flows. If the flows were too high, they washed out and couldn't be rebuilt until flows reduced. If the flows were too low, they just didn't divert the water that they should. Debris can destroy and push up these structures throughout the year. Rebuilding every year was expensive and disruptive of the riparian ecosystem. Also, on years like 2019, where runoff lasted longer than expected, that water would likely have been unusable by most of the ditch companies that use push-up dams in the inability to rebuild those structures in a timely manner. We decided to take a phased approach to our diversion structures. So phase one was really structured around planning and design. We really wanted to look at projects that were a win-win for both the agricultural community and the environment. Part of that was collecting additional field data on these diversion structures, preparing design drawings and an opinion of costs, mapping out these diversions on the Mancos River and locating each diversion structure, beginning an analysis for in-stream flow opportunities, and then really looking at what does the overall project management look like for the continuation of each phase. In phase two, we started in the implementation part of our phases. Many of the ditch companies had members who were active on the Conservation District Board, and they became very involved in the proposed re-engineering of these diversion structures. Our local irrigators really understood the river system and had been working it for years, and so they were integral in looking at what would it look like to re-engineer and look at more permanent structures in the river. The costs were high, but not scary, combined with some grant money and some in-kind support from landowners. A small ditch diversion is readily redone. In phase two, we did target 4 irrigation diversions. Initially, we were going to look at a 5-year reassessment plan, but really decided that reassessing in spring during high flow and in fall during low flow really provided more of a baseline for future restoration projects. This is one of those diversion structures that was completed during phase two. You'll see on the left is a pool that helps kind of prevent erosion of the push-up dam. Certainly tarps were used, but it's not great for fish passage and it's easily washed out. On the right is the new structure with stepped pools in the main channel, a proper head gate, a sluice gate that helps to dump water when necessary or to clear mud or lower the water level in the winter. There is an overflow channel of concrete blocks to the left of the head gate, and so logs can easily just be flipped over the diversion by hand or will likely just flow downstream during the next high water event. So in phase three, we targeted 3 additional diversion structures. These were mostly picked because of the proximity on a single landowner's property. They also had a significant degree of degradation, but we were able to really improve a larger reach of the Mancos River by selecting 3 on an individual landowner's property. They also had a great deal of excess sedimentation issues that were happening, and so we felt like the installation of those sluice gates was really going to be able to address that issue. This is one of those diversions here. The photo on the left, when I asked a landowner, is that a diversion structure? He said, yes, that is a diversion. No, it does not work well. Yes, it is cheap. So you will see the step down structure on the right allows for water to cascade over it and fish certainly to pass both ways. This is another diversion during that phase 3. It is an obvious aquatic barrier and hazard. Debris catches and creates issues with diverting water properly. It can also cause silt to dump just beyond the drop, which would again need to be removed each subsequent year. This is an after photo at high flow or relatively high flow. You can see here it is a fish-friendly, stable structure. It can handle that high and low water. At the top level there of the diversion structure, it creates really great fish pools, but also the irrigator has that consistent level of water to divert on a more consistent basis. It has a sluice gate bypass and a reel head gate. This is the a photo of it at low flow. Again, you can see it is still not a fish barrier, and it has that consistent flow rate up at the top of the diversion structure. Pros of these rock structure diversions, really there's very low maintenance so that they're not in the stream every single year. They are fish friendly. They have actual head gates, which has made our water commissioner very happy. A sluice gate can help clean muck out and reduce winter ice loads, and they really do actually divert water when you need it. After phase 3, due to a drought, we really felt like the next steps within our district was a water concern gathering from our local community. We interviewed 64 individual water users and land managers, and drought and climate change were really #1 concern following our drought in 2018. But really maintain their importance and priority with our continued drought cycles today. A number of concerns fell under these 2 categories: groundwater supply, potential impacts to the economy, specifically agricultural livelihoods, environmental flows for fish and aquatic life, impacts to downstream users, and what we were seeing as kind of a consistent shrinkage to our snowpack and an inadequate supply. A drought resiliency planning effort ensued out of our concern gathering, and we identified the need for understanding the hydrology within our watershed, current conditions, but then also future alternatives. We embarked on a watershed-wide modeling project with Wilson Water Group to kind of jumpstart this process. So next steps were a stream management plan, and we are currently in phase 1 of that. This has been a huge continuation of our diversion projects on the Mancos River, but we have added some components that we're hoping will help to inform our watershed plan and really add to it on the environmental and flow side. Our first goal was continued and increased stakeholder engagement. We really didn't want to lose momentum from those early days of gathering feedback from landowners on those diversion structures and how they manage the river, but also to their concerns around drought and climate change. We wanted to finalize that hydrologic model so that we could start asking it future scenarios, specifically around climate. Our climate scenarios that we are choosing are the 2 from the state that are recommended from the state, but we're also looking at a 10-year history of hydrology and using scenarios that have an increased frequency in what we've seen in past drought years. Recreational opportunities through the town of Mancos as one of kind of our exciting pieces of our stream management plan and came out of our concern gathering. We want to look at safety, but we also want to look at how do we really connect our community back to the Mancos River and offer access for those recreational opportunities. We're concerned about legal options for water right holders within our stream management plan and want to make sure that we are working within those legal options and we're not putting a water right at risk or infringing on any type of historical water use. One of our last goals within the stream management plan is to create a coordinated monitoring plan. This goes back to that 303D listing on the East Mancos, but also coordinating with a lot of our partners throughout the watershed on how do we want to monitor this in the future, including those diversion structures, continuing to coordinate and monitor those, but then also on the water quality side as well. So along with our watershed plan, a lot of the work that we've completed and a lot of the funding that we have been fortunate enough to acquire are due to a ton of partners and a whole lot of technical assistance providers. We are so fortunate that we are not working alone as the Mancos Conservation District, and that these partnerships that we've been able to establish, they really do increase your wealth of knowledge, your expertise and resources available, and really make for better planning and project development and implementation. They also really help to reach a greater audience. And so these partners have just been integral to our process. Some of our funding sources that we've utilized not only on the diversion structures, but also some of our water quality projects that we have addressed in the last 6 years. The Colorado State Conservation Board has been highly valuable in offering technical assistance positions through their district conservation technician program and their salinity technician program. This has allowed us as a conservation district to offer technical assistance throughout these projects. The NRCS has been also valuable on that technical assistance side, and then also offering cost share opportunities to our private landowners for a lot of these projects. The Colorado Water Conservation Board, we have been able to successfully acquire their WSRF funds, some of their watershed funding for our hydrology model, our watershed work, and then also our stream management planning work. We have also been fortunate enough to acquire Colorado Water Plan funds that helped with a lot of our water concern gathering and our outreach around drought and climate change. The Bureau of Reclamation has supported us through Water Smart grants, again, looking at climate scenarios and making climate-based decision processes. And they have also supported our local irrigators and ditch companies with Bureau of Reclamation salinity funds for the piping of ditches and increased water efficiency and the reduction of salt. The Southwestern Water Conservation District has really been there for us with those match dollars that you need a lot of times for some of these funding processes. And they have funded both feasibility projects and water projects for us. CDPHE, or the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, has been integral in our water quality work that we've been doing to address those 303D listings that are from natural sources and mining sources. Trout Unlimited came to the table for our diversion structures and really helped us make sure that our diversion structures were both environmentally sound and fish friendly. River Network has been a huge supporter of the Mancos Conservation District and our stream management plan, and in-kind offerings of support and help as we developed our grant and are developing our stream management plan. There are a wealth of resources and support, and they have offered some funding for us as well. And then the Mancos Conservation District in 2018 was successful in passing a mill levy election. It's not a huge amount every year, but it does speak to our constituent buy-in. It did pass by 61% and gives us a little bit of resources each year to put back into our community in these projects. So I've touched really briefly on these projects today and want to leave time for questions. But I wanted to let you know I do have full reports on a lot of these things that I've mentioned today and a lot of these projects that I've mentioned today and a lot of our assessments. And would be happy to share those reports in full. And then I also just want to say, feel free to reach out to me with any questions you may have after today. My last slide is a little bit maybe lessons learned. In my last 6 years, I've been very busy and have kind of learned to start slow, that it's really important to have a clear understanding of community need. It helps to have a plan, whether that's a watershed, a stream management plan, an integrated water management plan, a drought contingency plan. All of those things really help support, those plans really help support moving forward with projects. We would not be able to do it without our partners and buy-in from our local community and our funders. And then capacity is always a big issue and certainly something to consider. So I wanted to end today's presentation with this slide, kind of lessons learned. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks, Gretchen. Great. So many issues and so many things you covered in a short period of time, and it's a tremendous amount of work. I don't think we have any questions yet in the chat, but if anybody has a question, feel free to just go ahead and post those and we'll address those. I did wonder on, you mentioned that all of on the diversion structures where they built the rock weirs or the step ups and made them fish friendly, but also considerably more functional for the irrigator in terms of diverting water at different flow regimes. Did the Fish and Wildlife Service and Parks and Wildlife experts weigh in then on developing those or designing those structures to ensure they were fish friendly?
Yes, they did. We worked very closely with Jim White with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. He is our local fish biologist, and he was very helpful in not only the design piece, but also the construction and kind of inspection piece.
I also wondered, you have a lot of partners, so you guys have been really, really good at an outreach, obviously. I just wondered, what are the different methods that you use to stay in touch, and keep all of your partners, because we've got agriculture, environmental, recreation, different government agencies, municipal interests, and so on. There's a lot of different folks and different messages to convey in some cases. How do you manage all that?
It really is a greater job of the Watershed group and kind of the formally coming together as a group and having that buy-in and being able to assess the watershed and make sure that we're not missing any partners and that everyone's at the table. We've also become kind of strategic in the last couple of years with how often we meet and kind of creating layers within our watershed group. It also helps to have a watershed coordinator that's helping to communicate and coordinate things, is doing that outreach and scheduling meetings. And so we've been very fortunate, I think, in being able to formalize our watershed group and really get organized. We have the different layers I mentioned. So we have the greater watershed meetings a couple times a year that typically hold presentations on a lot of the work that's being done, and those typically have a higher level of attendance. We have a watershed leadership team that is a really great representation of the stakeholders at the local level. And then we also have technical team meetings, depending on the projects that are currently being addressed. The technical team meets monthly to make sure that those projects move forward. All of those meetings are open to the public, but we have made them kind of strategic in making sure that not only grant applications and future projects but also the implementation of current projects move forward.
Great. Yeah, that's a lot. And a watershed coordinator, I think, is someone that you had mentioned you've hired in the last couple years. Is that right? And I know
Yes.
you had said that person has really been important in especially working with ag producers.
Yes, and then on the stream management plan side, we also do have an agricultural consultant that is kind of a coordinator on the agricultural side of our stream management plan. He is highly qualified to speak to his own experience as a water right holder and a ranch manager. But he's doing a really great job with outreach, collecting feedback and concerns, and bringing that back to kind of the greater watershed group on the stream management plan. And it's been just a really important process for us to create kind of that conduit within the community. It's been a challenge with COVID. I won't say that's not true. The communication and outreach piece has been a challenge. But having that agricultural consultant has been integral to moving forward with our stream management plan.
Yeah, I think everything has been more challenging with COVID. So we do have one question. You know, when you change the river and make it more fish friendly and improve those diversion structures off the river, sometimes it also makes it look pretty ideal for the beavers. So have you had any challenges with beavers, and do you anticipate any? What have you done in that area?
Sure. So that is actually something that's kind of come out of our stream management plan. We do have some landowners that have beaver currently on their properties and are encouraging and very appreciative of that. But they can make a mess of a culvert under a county road or a ditch structure. One of the things that we're looking at within our stream management plan are the installation of structures that are both beaver friendly and ag friendly, and that really help agriculture and beaver work side by side. But I will say, with the lack of water and the drought in the Mancos watershed, we have seen kind of a historical exodus of beaver within our watershed. And so we want to be very intentional and make sure that we have the water to encourage, I guess, beaver to come back.
Well, when you get that figured out, we'll have to have you back do another webinar on that. I know that's a big question, because I think there is a lot of interest in reintroducing beaver if we can make it work for ag producers. Absolutely.
Yes, I think that is integral. It comes back to the same win-win. You know, can we find that cooperation between the two?
Mm-hmm. So I think we've got time for one more question, and this is from Chris Jaros. How long, you had mentioned that one of the improvements that you've installed with the head gates and with the diversions is the sluice gates to try to deal with that silt and try to get that out of the ditch or remove that before it gets into the ditch. How long have you been adding those, and how are they functioning, or how have they been functioning over the long term?
So I believe the first ones with our diversion projects were installed around 2012 or 2013. And the last time I talked with my irrigators would be last year. I don't believe they had needed to do any improvements so far to those, other than minimal routine maintenance. So they have not had to re-weld, they have not had to dig out and replace. They are still working very well. And instead of an irrigator needing to go down to that structure once a day, it's, you know, maybe once a week. And so it's really cut down on maintenance and time.
Oh, that's awesome. Anything that can cut down on maintenance and time is music to the ears of the average ag producer. So I think we're going to keep rolling here, and we've got Dave Cancer as our next speaker. And again, if you have questions that you think of for Gretchen, while Dave's talking, you're still free to put those in the chat box, and Gretchen can answer those in the chat. Dave is the Deputy Chief Engineer of Colorado River Water Conservation District, also known as the River District. For 26 years, he's been working to address the challenges of water quality and quantity that are facing Western Slope counties. He is a registered professional engineer in Colorado and has earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in geological engineering from the Colorado School of Mines. Dave works on behalf of multiple beneficiaries in the Colorado River's headwater counties to protect and enhance water supply availability. And in recent years, he has also focused on targeted irrigation infrastructure projects that improve efficiency and reduce salt loading to rivers and streams and assist in drought contingency planning. Today, Dave is going to be overviewing an irrigation infrastructure improvement project, as well as funding sources that have been utilized to implement project components. So Dave, if you are ready, I'll let you take it away.
Well, I think I'm ready, and hopefully you can all see and hear me and my slides.
Yep.
I am extremely pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Phil, and hello to all today on the spending their lunch with us. So Gretchen did an amazing job. Maybe when I grow up, I can be like Gretchen. A lot of the themes that she put together and talked about are the same themes that I'm going to touch on. I'll try not to repeat them, but really the main theme I want to talk about is the multiple benefit, and because those can bring multiple sources of funding together. And I think for you all as ag producers, it's key to be able to bring funds together and to bring people together. Before I get into it too much, I want to make sure you know who I am and who I work with, and see if I can get my slides to go. And that is the Colorado River District, who in the face of a lot of controversy in the early part of the century was formed 1937 to protect the West Slope water users. And really it's this region here, 15 counties in West and Northwest Colorado that make up the main part of the watershed, the richest water yielding area of the entire Colorado River Basin is right here in these 15 counties, about 1/3 of the state. And our board, one from each county. I see one of our board members from Routt County is on the call today. Good to see you, Doug. This is a board policy here and a mission to protect, conserve, use, and develop the water resources of the Colorado River Basin. So we have a lot of challenges. You heard all about them in the Mancos area. We have them in spades, and the main two are quality and quantity. To address these two main issues, water resource issues, we put together what we are calling the Lower Gunnison Project, or LGP for short. The formal title, it's kind of long-winded, but modernizing agricultural management using a cooperative approach to increase water efficiency and water quality improvement. So there's your kind of multiple benefits, right? We do this and are doing this. We've been doing this really almost 10 years now in the making, and we're coming to a close on the first phase of the Lower Gunnison project. And it's all together, we've scraped together about $50 million of mostly federal dollars, but these are a series of projects. It's not just one project, and I'll get into that. But the principal funders, you can see NRCS, and I see several NRCS folks, our benefactors on the call here. Reclamation, the CWCB, the Water Conservation Board, the River District, and some other NGOs, non-governmental entities like Trout Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy. So jumping into some of the details here, the overarching objective, as I mentioned, is really about agricultural water use efficiency. Doing this in the Lower Gunnison has a whole bunch of benefits, and we went after separate funders for each of the benefits. The main one is really water quality. That's sort of the nameplate. It's ironic or coincidental that we're paired up with Gretchen and the Mancos folks, because in the Lower Gunnison, we are dominated by the Mancos Shale, and I'll talk a lot about that. But before I do, not only reducing the water losses for seepage and deep perk, which can move that salt and selenium to the river system, we're also doing a whole bunch of activities, again, a lot like what Gretchen described, on improving all the infrastructure from the source to the point of use, whether that's reservoirs, diversion structures, canals, ditches, and even right onto the farm. So we're integrating all these activities and really trying to result in increased ag production, of course, better flows, better water quality, better habitat with less salt, less selenium, primarily for threatened and endangered species. And these species, of course, bring their own constituencies and monies. So the Lower Gunnison, if you're not familiar, here in Western Colorado, it's kind of shown in the lower thumbnail where my laser pointer is. You can see it's kind of the heart and soul, I like to think of it, in the Upper Colorado River Basin. And it's unique for a number of reasons, excuse me. It's a fascinating place, bound together by water, but unfortunately unequally. There's some areas like the Uncompahgre Valley here, extremely water rich. They have access to the main stem of the Gunnison River through the Gunnison Tunnel. And other areas, I'll talk about the North Fork in particular, with very little storage and a smaller tributary, the North Fork of the Gunnison, which is water short. But they do share agricultural heritage in common. And another thing, of course, is the fertile soils. But what they also share is a dirty secret, which is the Mancos Shale. The Mancos underlies the entire basin, in the lowlands anyway. And that Mancos Shale is responsible for almost 60%. Well, depending where you look, if you look at Lake Powell, about 60% of the selenium arises in the Lower Gunnison and parts of the Grand Valley, and about a third of the salt comes out of this area as well. So that's the main driving force for the Lower Gunnison project, and the reason that we really worked hard to put this thing together. Obviously, scenes like this are what draw people, irrigators, producers, hobbyists, and just general public to the Lower Gunnison. The quality of life is high, as it is throughout Colorado, of course, and we want to protect that and the agricultural heritage. So we do this in the Lower Gunnison project through a series of actions. I'm going to just kind of keep hammering home on this reduce deep percolation, which is moving salt and selenium. If we put too much water on the soils through irrigation practices, whether it's on farm, near farm, or off farm, these are, again, from source to use. If there's too much water, it can percolate and move undesired contaminants to the river system. And this is a concern, again, Fish and Wildlife, clean water folks, and I see Kanan is on the call from the Department of, or Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. They're a big funder of ours as well. I'm very interested in what we're doing. So doing so, we want to minimize losses. We want to put open earthen canals into pipe. We want to re-regulate and become more efficient with our handling of our conveyance systems. And that means putting in re-regulation ponds and reservoirs, moving from a system that's always on, always running, You know, you don't leave your kitchen sink on all the time, right? You want to be able to turn it off and turn it back on when you need to use it. That's a key thing in gravity systems in the West Slope. This is not a common thing. So we're trying to be able to minimize spills, maximize efficiency. Do that through also putting in technology, SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition. That's the acronym for that. That means putting in measurement systems. That means putting in controls, telemetry, and allowing you to remotely see what's happening on the system and saving time and energy. And of course, on farm, encouraging folks through this funding mechanism, through an integrated approach to increase application efficiency. So that means converting flood irrigation to more efficient systems, sprinklers, drip, etc. So as we move here to the next slide, this is a picture. I want to zero in on the North Fork Basin, okay? This is kind of fuzzy image. I want you to just look at the green areas. Those are the irrigated areas, of course. Brown areas, non-irrigated. It's a highly diverse geographic area. Some of these peaks here, 13,000 feet. Some of these valleys, you know, below 6,000 feet. A lot of gravity, a lot of erosion because of it, a lot of energy, and not a lot of water, believe it or not. This is a south-facing basin, and primarily for that reason, the south side of Grand Mesa, it's not a high-yielding water area. So water's at a premium, and we have some of the greatest microclimates for niche crops like hops. I'm stumbling here. Hops and wine grapes, stone fruits, palm fruits, a really amazing area. But the earlier settlers came in, they knew they needed to utilize the water resources. That water runs out in the late season. So in the 50s and 60s, Reclamation came along and added the Paonia project, which is a reservoir behind Paonia Dam. You know, a standard kind of reclamation project. And in fact, there's quite a few in the lower Gunnison. Reclamation through the auspices of the chairman of appropriations at that time, Wayne Aspinall, a name water watchers probably know, made it possible for quite a bit of investment in this country, in this area. And Paonia project was one of those. So they not only built the reservoir to provide late season augmentation water, but they also improved upon the Fire Mountain Canal. And the Fire Mountain Canal, I want to spend some time and tell you what we did there. But this can all be looked up. Here's a web reference, and I assume Phil will send this out. And if you want to get into the details, it's here for you. So as we wrap our arms around the lower Gunnison, we were able to come up with those 4 focus areas that I talked about. And the North Fork is one of them. The 4 focus areas within our watershed planning. And Gretchen spent a lot of time talking about planning. I'm going to cut that part short, but we did spend about good 5 years planning all these activities and prioritizing projects. And the Fire Mountain Canal Improvement Project was one of them. And you can kind of see in this map, I know it's hard to tell, throughout the yellow boundary, that's the North Fork Water Conservancy District. A lot of canals. These are all privately held individual ditch companies, and the one federal project. And the pink that may jump out at you is the Fire Mountain Canal Improvement Project with SCADA points and some piping, okay? And I'm gonna jump into that real quick and tell you how we did this. This is pretty much complete for the lower area. The Fire Mountain Canal Improvement Project, phase 1 is really coming to a close. And what that is, down here on the service area, okay, the business end of the conveyance is a 30-mile canal that you may have seen, the Fire Mountain Canal. Takes water not directly from Paonia Reservoir, but from the river downstream of the reservoir. And don't get distracted by all the colors yet, but just think of here, if you can see my pointer, the canal coming in, it needs to get across, this is LaRue Creek. So we have a new flume here, actually a siphon, inverted siphon, I should say, and all new piping. This used to be all gravity fed open canals. It used to be along this trace here. And by cutting that short, we were able to, this is all raw Mancos hillside. We were able to put that in pipe and keep the seepage from coming into the LaRue Creek, right? In addition, there's a feeder from LaRue Creek in the springtime. So it's not all reservoir water. And you can see there's about 16,000 acres of irrigated ground on what we call Rogers Mesa here at the tail end of the system. Now, your eye is going to go right to this demarcation line. This is a key that made this project work. The upper part, this is all funded. The piping associated with this was funded through Reclamation, Colorado River Salinity Control monies. Down below that line, and they can't touch because these are both federally funded, federal funds from Reclamation, federal funds from NRCS, Regional Conservation Partnership Program, RCPP, that you may have heard of. So we were able to leverage these two federal sources together, segregate the project into these two segments, of course, and attribute the benefits. All the salt control goes to Reclamation. They're in the business of salt control, whereas NRCS, they're also interested in salinity control, but they're able to fund other things like water conservation, the soil health, and the other part of the project is conservation of water. And so thinking back, of course, to the reservoir, you know, any water that's not run through the system is always on, is conserved, can stay in that reservoir and extend the growing season. Critically important for a water short area like the North Fork. So I just want to again kind of reiterate, even though it's one project, we split it up into two for funding reasons, and we also segregated the benefits. We segregated the benefits for the different funders, and I'll come back to that a little bit, but that's one of the key features that made this project work, where you could actually combine, in a sense, federal funds with federal funds. Prior to this, you couldn't do that. So very thankful for the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. All told, this project cost about $5 million, and Reclamation brought about $3 million of that, and we were able to bring $2 million of that through the Lower Gunnison RCPP. But that's not the whole story, because we have state funds and we had other grant funds that I'll talk about. And this model for Fire Mountain is the same model we use throughout those other 4 focus areas. Just to kind of give you a feel for what it looked like beforehand. You know, this is on the lower end of Rogers Mesa, where the Fire Mountain Canal gets pretty small. It starts out as a 90 CFS or sometimes greater during the springtime capacity, delivering that kind of water flow to the system and the users. Now this is all in pipe. Prior, we were looking at these service areas primarily with gated pipe, you know, gravity system, not using the pressure. We brought in about 4 miles of different kinds of pipe. For the geeks in the crowd, we use Spiralite, HDPE, and PVC. We used a whole bunch of different fittings, of course. And you can kind of see, of course, this is done in the wintertime when irrigation water's off, you know, pretty obviously. You can kind of see some of the nearby orchards. And when we're done, we end up actually with more arable land to irrigate. So it's a win-win from that perspective too. Although this particular area, of course, is within the federal reclamation right away. So maybe it just becomes habitat. In other areas, it can become irrigated. And of course, this allows in several ways the conversion from that gravity gated pipe to sprinkler systems. If we can capture the pressure in a pipe, closed pipe system, we can now distribute pressurized water throughout the area. So this is a real nice picture of the post implementation of this pivot. Excuse me. In the background, you can kind of see parts of Grand Mesa, a beautiful area, again, on the south side. So sort of coming to a close quickly here, you know, I just want to, like Gretchen, summarize with some lessons learned. Again, this is one piece of a very large multi-year, if not decade effort. So we're not done. There's no mission accomplished here yet, but we do have some lessons, interim lessons. And for me, these are my conclusions. You know, think big. When we have a big project like this, to be able to accomplish big things, we need to think big and think about how we can do this on an integrated watershed basis. And I should just point out again that the RCPP actually requires a watershed plan. The funding source that we used under RCPP is called Public Law 566. It's primarily a flood oriented, or historically was a flood oriented funding system. And now it's been broadened, and we are able to apply that for irrigation and canal systems. And the reason I bring this up is that it requires this watershed planning effort. Just like Gretchen talked about, we were able to do a whole lot of master planning and had one large environmental assessment that guided our activities and gave us the permitting in a comprehensive or systematic, programmatic way that was really, I think, critical. So that's thinking big. And then the other thing of many is, you know, we really worked hard to match up the funders' needs, you know, the agency needs, the state needs, and the agricultural user needs, along with the districts and the areas, the sponsors, the project sponsors, right? So in this case, for the Fire Mountain Canal and Reservoir Company was the main driver. The River District was actually the overall sponsor of the RCPP Lower Gunnison project, but we were able to match up what the funders are looking for: salinity control, for example, selenium control, habitat, etc. And each one of those has sort of their benefactor. The Reclamation is interested in salt. You know, CDPHE, very interested in selenium. You know, Fish and Wildlife, interested in habitat. So we're able to combine and leverage those funding sources together. And as some of the sub categories is, you know, we are able to reach a tipping point, if you will, using non-federal match. So each of these federal sources do need local match. And we were able to come up with that through state and local funding. CWCB, Colorado Water Plan, now absolutely critical. Roundtable funds, critical to get over that tipping point, to make the project doable and cost effective. I talked about segregating the project into components, really important. I talked about you know, separate funding for separate components, really important. And in-kind funding, not to be missed or forgotten, are all the manpower, people power that, say, the Fire Mountain Canal folks brought to the table, managing the projects, really important. So we're able to leverage and utilize all these different programs, and even those that you don't think about. USGS, they do water quality monitoring. We're able to see the changes in and trends over time through their work, and to prove to the funding agencies that we're making a difference, similar to the quantity issues. And we actually see that in the reservoir, right? A longer season. So in summary, you can read it here. You know what the problems are. We've got old infrastructure. We've got limited funds. We've got all sorts of different needs. We bring those together in a cooperative approach, allows us to leverage and combine funds. And really the solution, I think, somewhat elegant, if you will, allows you to collaborate and coordinate in this portfolio approach to meet multiple benefits. So that's kind of it in a very quick nutshell. I'll leave a few minutes to discuss. We do have a lot of information on our website at the Colorado River District. We also have social media if you're into that. The other one I should have put on here is another very important resource, which is GunnisonRiverBasin.org. It's another independent website associated with the roundtable, and a lot of the project information is on GunnisonRiverBasin.org. So I can leave it there, Phil, and open it up and see if there's discussion to be had.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Man, you covered so much, and really love the lessons learned. So much of that applies to, pretty much everybody's project in one way or another. One thing I kind of wondered about when you look at the scope of your project that you guys have been working on for, 10 years or so, it's a massive scope. It's pretty daunting for an individual, small conservancy district or an irrigation company or conservation districts to look at something like that. A lot of them just simply don't have the funds. I did wonder how do you manage all of those grants in terms of, is that in internal staffing that manages those, and what, if any, advice might you have for smaller conservation districts and the like as to how they might accomplish that?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I probably won't be able to get into all the nuance and detail, but essentially we're trying to empower the local companies and ditch companies and conservancy districts. They are on one side applying for, say, federal salinity control dollars. That money goes to them, and then through our combined efforts, River District staff time, their unfortunately volunteer, mostly staff time, work together to create reports, timelines, budgets, and trying to integrate those in a way that makes sense to them. What we want, of course, is for them, the local districts and water right holders, to drive the bus to make sure that their needs are being met. But our job at the River District and other regional entities, the state roundtable folks, is to combine those and look for those benefits, right? And see if you can leverage salt into the selenium, as I mentioned, and wildlife and flow. So there's no silver bullet. It takes a whole lot of work. It probably drives some people to leave some of the boards, and it attracts other people. So it's I don't want to pull any punches. It's not easy, but luckily the River District is dedicated and committed to these type of regional solutions. I think in the south, in the Mancos area, there's the Southwest Water Conservation District. So there are other umbrella organizations, but it's got to be a layered or almost vertically integrated approach to make these things work. And I want to point out also, we had a whole bunch of coordinators, paid coordinators from our district, also from the Colorado Department of Agriculture, Paul Kmeyer, and other folks and other agencies. So you kind of also build this little army of folks that are committed to the same thing, and you kind of hopefully are able to assign roles and responsibilities. But when it comes down to it, it is daunting, and you have to have points of contact and responsible parties to make sure that the commitments are met. And in our case, it fell on us at the River District to be that. And I think the model can work in other areas in other ways. And I think Gretchen is a great example of that as well.
And if Phil, can I comment something? This is Kenan with CDPHE.
Sure.
I was just gonna say, Dave, thank you for the presentation, and Gretchen, to you too. Dave said this projects or structure can be implemented somewhere else too, and we gained that experience in Gunnison area, and we are now actually implementing it in the lower Arp area. You know, similar projects, same structure. I shouldn't say same structure, but pretty much the same structure. And because we saw it work for selenium and salinity in the lower Gunnison area, and then we are implementing in somewhere else. I have a meeting, I gotta go, but let me get one more thing in. Because of all those works, Dave, you guys are doing out there, the Water Quality Control Commission potentially be removing the lower Gunnison, what we call a 02, basically stretch going from confluence with Uncompahgre River and confluence with Colorado River. That area will be removed from 303 delisting, which is the impaired waters for selenium. I think that is a huge success story right there, you know, in summary. Thanks for all you guys are doing. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, that's
Thanks,
a
Kenan.
huge point. Thanks, Kenan, for throwing that in. And that was the objective, right? Or one of them, of many. So yeah, we're a little past our time. So what we're going to do is wrap up. But Danielle, we have your question. We're going to pass that on to Dave, and we'll get you an answer. It's a great question, but I think it has a fairly complex answer. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up now, and we really appreciate everybody joining us on this. A reminder that this whole webinar has been recorded, and we will be posting that next week along with the highlights. And by the way, you can also find on our website at agwaternetwork.org a list of state and federal grants that are available for ag water projects, including information about maximum grant funding that's available, as well as match requirements. So just in conclusion, I want to extend our special thanks to our speakers, Gretchen Rank of the Mancos Conservation District and Dave Kanzer of the Colorado River District. I really appreciate it. And feel free to contact Gretchen or Dave. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. If you have any general comments or questions about today's webinar, feel free to contact me. And thank you again for joining us today. And this concludes our webinar. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.